Hey folks, this is Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home Parenting. We appreciate you getting here today. And I'm on the wrong slide. I apologize. Let's see if I can get all the way back to the beginning. I'm Ruth Freeman, and I am the founder of Peace at Home Parenting. And sorry for these flying slides, but these things happen. And I'm here with Tanika Eves, one of our Peace at Home Parenting teachers. And while I correct my mistake, Tanika, will you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ruth. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tanika Eves, and I'm one of the teachers for Peace at Home Parenting. It's great to be with you all this evening. Thanks for making the time to join us. We're excited to get started.
So today we're talking about protecting your child's mental health, some knowledge and skills that will help you support your child. After this class, you're going to be able to define some mental health basics. You're going to learn, if you don't already know, about the adult adverse childhood experiences, which are things from the past that may affect our parenting today. We're going to talk about some yellow and red flags and basics of child mental health. And you're going to be able to recognize and apply some very practical day-to-day behaviors related to good health habits and steps to creating a positive relationship with your child. At the end of this class, we're going to invite you to tell us what's going to be your first action step. You're going to hear a whole lot today. Keep in mind that this class is being recorded. You can access it later. You'll get an email with a recording of the class. You're also going to get handouts highlighting all the important parts of the class. So stay present and let us know what's happening for you. Ask questions, enter them into the chat, raise your hand. We love to hear from you. So we're going to start with a poll and ask you, what do you want most from today's class? Do you want to just better understand your child's moods and behavior? Do you want to improve your relationship with your child? Do you want to support your child better? Maybe you want to recognize how your own mental health might be impacting your child, or maybe you have another goal for this class. And if that's true, put that goal into the chat if you feel comfortable doing that. You can either post your chats to just the panelists or the facilitators, or you can post your chats to everyone. When you go to post that, you can click on everyone or just the panelists. So it looks like almost half of us are concerned about supporting our kids, and about a third of us want to understand their moods and behavior. And the rest are kind of equally distributed. So wherever you are, you've got some friends in this class. And please keep in mind that our polls are totally confidential. No one knows how you're responding. So don't worry about that. We want to hear the real story. So Bessel van der Kolk is actually the father of trauma studies here in the United States. And he says the parent-child relationship is the most powerful mental health intervention known to humankind. That puts a lot of weight on our shoulders, but there are some very specific ways in a day-to-day manner that you can either help mental health issues not get more serious or actually prevent some of them. Now, mental health issues are a combination of nature and nurture. And of course, that's not good news for parents either way. But you want to do your very best to be thinking about the nurture part. And most of us didn't learn this at home. Dan Siegel is sort of the bridge between neuroscience and parenting. He's written some fabulous books. This book is called Parenting from the Inside Out. He talks about how our childhood influences our parenting behavior. And he says, in the absence of reflection, history often repeats itself. And parents are vulnerable to passing on to our kids unhealthy patterns from the past. Those are patterns that we grew up with. Understanding our lives can free us from the almost predictable situation in which we're going to recreate the damage to our kids that was done to us in our own childhoods. Even the decision to say, I'm going to do it the opposite of my parents, I'm never going to be like my parents, that in itself can create challenges for you and your kids. So understanding how your childhood impacts your today behavior really makes a huge difference.
So as Ruth was saying, I'm just going to go through. So you may or may not be familiar, but there had been a study done over the past decade about adverse childhood experiences and the impact on our health, physically and mentally and emotionally. And so we have probably all experienced one of these adverse childhood experiences, at least about 61% of the population has. And as Ruth was saying earlier, it is very important for us, um, as supportive parents, if we have that intention, to be in conversation with what our experiences were as children, and what we would like to do differently and what we would like to preserve. So knowing what's happened to you and being able to acknowledge that is really important.
We have a question from, and I'm going to launch a poll in a minute, but we have a question asking about particular corporations, and are there people from their corporations? There's people from several corporations, because we work with companies that have subscriptions to Peace at Home Parenting. However, the polls themselves and even the comments you make, if you make them only to the panelists, only panelists will see them. We don't have any representatives from corporations on the facilitators today. This is a class for everybody. I hope that answered that question. So we're going to ask you right now, how many of these adverse childhood experiences that you see on the screen have you actually experienced? And again, this is totally confidential. And you may not know, but you may be in the minority that did not have any of those. Tanika, did you want to say something else about adverse childhood experiences while we have the poll up?
Yes, I mean, just so I think it's important. This isn't about sort of attaching stigma to this. Most of us have had difficult things happen to us at some point in our lives, and typically it is childhood. And we know now with all of the brain science that's coming out that what happens early in life has a lasting impact, in terms of how we think, how we learn, how we relate to other people, and certainly then can transmit over into how we parent our children. So this is all confidential, and it's just really helpful to be in touch with this so that you can be more intentional about anything that you want to do differently from how you were parented. So the average person has experienced maybe two. Most people have experienced at least one, and then about 25% to a third have experienced three or more. So not at all uncommon, and nothing to be ashamed of.
And you'll see that in the general population, about 2/3 of the population has had at least one. So we have that here. We're reflecting the population in this, and 25% of us in the general population have had three or more. And some of the things that are important about this is that physical and mental health difficulties tend to go up as your adverse childhood experiences go up.
Questions or comments at this time about anything, or any need for clarification?
And you can throw those questions into the chat. You can raise your hands.
So we're going to go through sort of the main ingredients of children's mental health and how to recognize when you might be concerned. So it's really important to remember that, children, most children will exhibit or experience a broad range of emotions, and that's actually normal and healthy. And we want that, even if those emotions are difficult or maybe not socially acceptable in the moment. So we don't want to diagnose, or what we call pathologize, normal reactions. If a child loses a pet and they're grieving, if a child is angry because they've got to put their toys away and get ready for bed, those are very normal, natural responses. And so we want to acknowledge and recognize those feelings and accept those feelings, because that's part of being a healthy person, to express a range of emotions, right? And so while mental illness is a very common health condition, it affects 1 in 5 people. Most mental illnesses are very treatable. We want to be careful about not being very quick to diagnose our children if they are behaving in ways that we consider problematic, or if they're behaving different or having different emotions. And so it might be best to start from a place of curiosity. And usually behavior that's considered problem behavior is really a child's way of communicating that they need help. I spent several years as an early childhood mental health consultant in childcare classrooms, and was often called in when the 2-year-old was flipping over tables and biting the infants. And it was never about a problem child. It was about a child trying to communicate that they didn't feel safe, or that there were too many changes going on in their lives, and it was really a call for help. So to try to transform our thinking from bad behavior to behavior that is communicating a need for help and intervention. And also thinking about, what do you prioritize as a parent? Are you all about your child being totally obedient and respectful and high achieving? Or are you a parent who is led by wanting to have a mutually respectful, warm, caring relationship with your child? Like, what leads your parenting is really important as we explore how to build healthy relationships with our children. And these relationships will last a lifetime.
I would add, Tanika, that diagnosis is not an exact science. So
Yes.
you may have a child who's been given a diagnosis, and it's meant to be sort of a shortcut to diagnose certain behaviors and symptoms. And sometimes it guides treatment, which can be helpful, but it won't necessarily last a lifetime. It also may not be exactly right. And you really want to be part of that process and understanding what this diagnosis means for your child in particular.
Thank you, Ruth. I think I might also say, too, that with everything that we're seeing with sort of what I call the fallout from the pandemic, I know for myself as a clinician, I'm always asking the question, even when I'm diagnosing, is this really a diagnosis that's appropriate, or is this a response to a situation or to trauma? Is this a trauma adaptation? So really important to consider those things.
And, I would add, we're learning about even teen suicidality and even younger kids suicidality, which is a very growing problem in the United States. Even a child having suicidal ideas, for example, is a continuum. So it may be that it's the result of depression, which is what clinicians often assume, but sometimes it's just a situation like Tanika just described. So they happen to do sexting with a friend and it went all through the school. That circumstance can cause a child to feel suicidal, but it isn't the same treatment as a child who's very, very depressed and suicidal. So diagnosis requires a lot of care, and it requires you being an active participant.
Great, thank you. And so in terms of looking at yellow flags, so parents know their children, right? So if you are noticing something unusual or a change, like we all say, follow your gut. Like you know your child, and you know when your child is not quite themselves. And so typically with very young children, a lot of times because they don't have language to tell us what's going on with them, we might see that there are some changes if they're distressed in terms of sleeping and eating, maybe behavior, their ability to transition from one activity to the next. With older children and adolescents, it may be that, a student who was performing very well is now not doing well. Maybe they're self-isolating. Maybe they're no longer interested in the things that they used to be interested in. And as well as there can also be disturbances in sleep and eating patterns. So these are all things to sort of tune into and pay attention to. So anxiety or worry can look different in children than in adults. It may also be important as the adult and as a parent to be in touch with your own anxiety, if that's an experience that you have. So for children, sometimes, your child may be more fearful of something that was quite routine before, or they may be constantly worrying about something going wrong. Heightened irritability, low tolerance for frustration, self-isolating, again, changes in eating and sleeping patterns. If kids, maybe they were happy to go to school and now they're telling you they don't want to go. Also like somatic or physical symptoms. So when things are happening in the body, like headaches, stomach aches, no appetite, being more tired, sleeping more, those can be signs of anxiety in children. And sometimes children don't have the language to tell us, or they don't know, they can't label that what they're feeling is in fact anxiety. So it helps to be aware of the physical signs.
Thank you, Tanika. I just want to acknowledge we just got a very complicated question from a mom of 3 children. And I'm going to ask you to email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. If any of you have any questions or follow-up issues or want to get to a class we mentioned, that email address, which our tech support Allie will put into the chat right now, is solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. And I want to suggest to this parent that just asked this question to email us about the question, because it's really bigger and more complicated than we can handle during this class. Thank you. So red flags require immediate attention. If you have a child that's talking about or taking action to hurt themselves or others, you want to get immediate help. There's a phone number 988 now that's about suicide prevention. You can call 911 if you're afraid. You can walk a child into an emergency room. That isn't always the best, but if it's the only thing you can come up with, do it. You can call your pediatrician. And in addition to that, it might be that the child doesn't seem grounded in reality. They're having trouble understanding you, or you're having trouble understanding them. You're going to call 911 with that, or walk into an emergency room. Some warning signs of suicidal thoughts are just talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide. They could be writing about someone else doing it, but if they're writing about it, you want to pay attention. Threatening to hurt themselves, looking for ways, searching on the internet, looking for means, intense agitation, difficulty sleeping or sleeping all the time, expressing that they feel like they have no reason to live or no sense of purpose in life, feeling trapped or thinking they can't get out of a bad situation. All of these are red flags, and you want to get your child to a clinician or get them to an emergency room or call your pediatrician to assess it. But don't tell yourself they're just looking for attention. If they're needing attention, they need it. Kids need attention to survive and thrive. Any questions or comments? Okay.
So what are some of the first steps to being able to do some of these things? So if you notice the running theme here is that it always goes back to the parent. And so there's two concepts here that we wanted to introduce or reiterate in terms of self-regulation and co-regulation. So self-regulation is sort of part one. You've got to be able to sort of name and recognize what you're feeling. And then you have to have some strategies for helping calm your own brain and sort of regulate your mood and your feelings before you can support your child. Ruth, you look like you want to say something.
No, I'm looking at a question that I'm going to answer in the chat. Go ahead.
All righty. Okay. And so co-regulation, if you notice, so when we have co preceding an action, that usually it means together. So how are we responding to our child when they are distressed or upset or maybe really dysregulated? And so a lot of that has to do with being supportive, naming what they're feeling, being curious about what they're feeling, but also modeling how do you then calm yourself? And a calm parent begets a calm child. A dysregulated parent begets a more dysregulated child. So it's real. So we really have to start with ourselves first, and then we can then be better teachers to our children about how to manage their thoughts and feelings.
We have mirror neurons, so we mirror each other. I realized, Tanika, that I should probably answer this out loud. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Someone's asking about long-term solutions to suicidal ideation. That means a child that has ideas about hurting themselves or committing suicide in young children as young as 8 years old. And I would say that the first step is an assessment. So you would want to talk to a psychologist. You start with your pediatrician, but you want to get a psychological assessment to sort of get underneath this. This is a pretty serious matter. And that can be a formal assessment. It can be an in the office assessment, but you want to have someone looking at the child and figuring out what's underneath this. You want to talk with the child about it. Tell me why you feel that way. And there are some particular programs that we recommend. One is called Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicidality, but I think it's been tested only for teens and adults. And there's also a great treatment program called Attachment-Based Family Therapy. The founder is Guy Diamond, and you might want to find a therapist who's been trained in that, and that pulls the family in. Sorry, Tanika.
No worries. Great answers to a very important question. So a couple of other things in terms of thinking about what are the ingredients of good mental health, we also have to think about sort of what are our lifestyle and health habits. So this is something that really all Americans are not doing well with, and that is sleep. How much are you sleeping? How much is your child sleeping? We function less well for every hour of sleep that we lose. Another just important piece to that too is that sleep needs look different for children depending on their age and their developmental level. Also, how much are you able to move your body? We know that getting regular exercise, I think it's about 30 minutes a day, and that could just be walking or gardening, but that this can release endorphins in the brain and help with managing and reducing symptoms of depression. Exercise can also be a brain calming practice and relaxation, as well as breathing techniques. Eating properly impacts our ability to have energy to exercise and sometimes impacts sleep. So if we're getting too much caffeine because we're coffee junkies, that might have not great ramifications for sleep later in the day. Also, how much joy do you have in your life? I don't know that people stop and ask themselves that enough. Do I have joy in my life? Do I have moments where I'm happy, where I'm enjoying things? So really think about what are you doing that brings you happiness? So take a moment and think about how many of these good health habits you currently practice on a regular, consistent basis.
And you can tell us in the poll. I'm going to add to what Tanika said in that kids look to us, they look to our faces, our body language to tell them about how the world is working. And if we are walking around with stressed, distracted faces, the kids think the world's not a safe place, and this will affect their mental health. So the good news about this crew is that there's nobody yet that aren't doing any of the healthy practices. We sometimes have people who haven't done any.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
about a third of us, almost a third of us are doing all of them, and about a half of us are doing 3. So we're not bad.
You have to start somewhere. So just a quick sidebar in terms of sleep. I'm not sure that we all realize as parents how critical sleep is. And so we need to think about what does it take for our child to fall asleep. If our infants, by 6 months or so of age are unable to put themselves to sleep unless they have breast or bottle feeding or rocking, we want to think about that. Difficulty falling asleep, not sleeping as much. I've worked with families in my clinical work that really don't have bedtime routines, and sometimes their toddler's going to bed at midnight. You really want to have a sleep hygiene routine where that child knows what to expect, and when it's time to start winding down and getting ready for bed, to have some rituals. You want to think about medical issues. Does your child are they snoring? Are they wetting the bed? Is there something going on developmentally? Teenagers need a lot more sleep than we've ever realized. And teenagers like to stay up late and they struggle to get up early. And they really still need about 7 to 10 hours of sleep. So it's really important to keep that in mind if you're parenting a teen. It's almost like having an infant again. Like you really have to pay attention to sleep patterns. Thinking about if there's night waking, if there's too much sleeping, if your child is not wanting to go to bed, which is a common thing. Is that, anxiety produced? Like what's the story behind that resistance to bedtime?
And I just want to let you all know that we are bringing on a sleep expert right now because this is really part of the epidemic that's resulted from the pandemic, this is a big issue for families and very connected to mental health.
So there's a comment here, Ruth, about so there's a better 1, 2, 3 magic when child isn't listening to parent and teachers.
So yes, there is a better strategy than 1, 2, 3 magic. 1, 2, 3 magic has nice aspects to it. However, it focuses more on compliance than relationship. And what we know about mental health is that it's relationship. That's the magic formula. Please email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com and we'll connect you with a few positive discipline resources. So in terms of the sleep question, we're not going to answer it because we are not. Do you have an answer for sleep without laying with him? He's 4 years old.
Hmm.
I want to let you know that we do have a great recorded class on sleep. If you email us, just ask for the classes on sleep. And in a few weeks, check in with us again and we will connect you with the sleep expert because these are important questions. Thank you. So one thing we're thinking about a lot in terms of mental health is screen use. And I want to mention Robert Lustig, Lustig. He's a pediatric endocrinologist, and he is talking a lot about how gaming and screen time affects the dopamine of the brain and gets children addicted and affects their moods, as well as food and processed food and sugar. So Lustig is very important in mental health, and you can follow his work online. But if you want to ask yourself, is screen use a problem? You want to consider, is screen use affecting the relationships that my kids have? Is it hard to get them off? When they have a bad day, is that the only way that they seem to make themselves feel better? And are they sneaking screen time? If some of these things are going on, you want to address it. It doesn't mean locking down and punishing and hassling, because that is not going to help their mental health, but it does mean getting some support. And we have several classes about this at Peace at Home. One way to handle this is to sit down as a family and talk about where can we have some places in our house that are screen free. And it isn't mentioned here, but I would say the bathroom should be a screen free place. Kids' bedrooms should be a screen-free place. If you have teenagers that use their phone as an alarm, go out and buy them an alarm. Their phone should not be in their room at night. The table where you have meals and do homework and play, maybe the table should be a screen-free place, especially around meals. And a lot of people are talking about the medical help of being in the outdoors. But if you're taking out your phone and trying to find the name of this tree and the name of this plant, you are interrupting what happens to your brain when you're surrounded by nature. And the car can be a great place to eliminate screens so that you're having those conversations. And sometimes you're having those tough conversations that are a little bit easier when they're kind of sideways in the car. Some families have what we call digital curfews, and they've worked out really well. It means that as a family, you pick times of day and days of the week when technology is just put aside. And you can say that, we use screens between this time and this time, especially as summer is starting to come. You can really, some parents say, I want you to be outside for an hour. I want you to have read for 20 minutes. I want you to have spent some time with other people. Then you can use your technology. So it might be that it's certain expectations, but it could also be after dinner and before bedtime, everybody's screen free. Or on Sundays, we do screen free Sundays. That's our Sabbath. And you want to make sure that you're keeping screens in high traffic areas when they're not supposed to be using their screens to avoid temptation to cheat. Or, you're taking the technology and bringing it into your bedroom at night so it's safe, so kids aren't tempted. Any questions or comments? Robert Lustig. It's spelled Lustig. And he has a lot of great books out. Robert Lustig, Lustig. So we're going to be talking about really the most powerful mental health prevention, which is strengthening your relationship with your child. And we have a few suggestions for you around that.
So the first thing we want to talk about and introduce, if people are not familiar, is this idea of attachment. And what does that mean? And we've probably heard the term like being attached or getting attached. This is actually a basic need for all human beings, and it starts right after birth in infancy. And so really attachment is about children feeling seen, safe, soothed, secure, and also heard, that they feel that they matter to someone. And typically, the first person or people that a child matters to are their parents and then their family by extension. So this is a really important concept. And attachment is something that we establish in infancy, but we continue to build and develop and grow over our lifespan. So we're going to talk about 10 steps to a positive relationship as a parent. And we're going to go through sort of each of these and talk about what they look like in real life, in real time. So noticing feelings. So the first place we have to start, as always, is with our own feelings. What are we feeling? And then how can we then notice and reflect what the child is feeling? And to maybe be, again, being curious, it seems like you feel this way. I wonder if maybe if you're frustrated that you can't get the puzzle to fit, to the puzzle piece to fit. So giving language and being curious can be really helpful. Accepting what the child is saying and what they're feeling. And also, culturally, many of us have been raised to sort of not have feelings or not have unpleasant feelings. And so it's just important to keep in mind that that's not really going to serve your child well. It probably didn't serve you well. I know it certainly didn't serve me well. So being more open about what we're feeling is really key to having that positive relationship.
And I want to just add to what Tanika has said here, that accepting the child's words, they might be stomping around and saying they feel sad. You don't need to correct them. If they say they feel sad, that's where you're going with that. And there's a wonderful book. If this is a challenge for you, if you didn't grow up with this, there's a wonderful book called Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett, Marcbrackett, Mark Brackett. He's the founder of the Yale University Emotional Intelligence Center. And this book is so, so helpful in thinking about this with our kids.
So think about, how much is warmth a part of your interaction with your child? When your child is reaching out to talk to you, are you reading their body language? What are you communicating? Like, I guess a question that Ruth often asks is like, are you a source of loving calm to your child, or are you a source of stress? So what kind of facial expression, what do you think your face is communicating? Is your body language stiff and tense, or are you relaxed? What about your tone of voice? How are you sort of navigating the relationship with your child in those opportunities for warmth and intimacy? And are you asserting appropriate boundaries as the parent? Be reliable. I cannot say this enough. Show up when you say you're going to show up. If you've agreed to do something, if you've promised to do something, do it. If you cannot, let your child know why you can't. And I know that may be difficult to hear because we think children should just accept whatever we say as parents, but that's not really how it goes. They're people, and this is a relationship, and relationships, are a two-way street. They're reciprocal. Follow through on your consequences. Don't make empty threats. Maybe try not to make any threats. Think about what you're saying, and can you follow through on whatever it is you're telling your child is going to happen if they don't do X. And be honest in a way that's developmentally appropriate, and that keeps your child in mind. Those are really important. Lack of consistency as a parent teaches your child that they cannot trust you, and so they will learn not to need you.
And that thing about attachment, feeling secure, they're not going to feel secure if they can't count on your words. And I just want to say a word about consequences. People think that consequences are the silver bullet. They are not. And punishment and consequences, sometimes mild consequences are needed, but they're not what influences positive behavior. And threatening consequences might, in the short run, scare your child into compliance, but they do not create long-term behavior change. There are discipline approaches that do, and email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com to learn about that.
So think about your child's age and stage, right? Like, how do you explain things to a child depending on their developmental level? Many of you probably had to explain when in the pandemic on lockdown, what does that mean to a 2-year-old versus a 4-year-old versus a 15-year-old? Keeping that in mind, keeping in mind, what is it that my child is needing to do at this particular stage of development? Teenagers need to be independent. They need to be forming their social support networks outside of their family. Toddlers need to know that they are a self separate from their parents and be able to explore the world. So keep those developmental tasks in mind, and also think about, maybe if your child has different developmental needs from most kids their age, what does that look like, and how can you support their social and emotional and cognitive skills?
I just want to point out that Tanika talked about toddlers and teens, and I often think that there's something similar in those two developmental
They're
stages.
absolutely parallels. They're parallel. It's the same struggle for independence and self-actualization. It's just more complicated and more stressful, probably. So along with this idea of, I mentioned being reliable, part of that reliability also has to do with what kinds of routines do you have, and we talked about sleep, we talked about meals. What can your child expect out of the day? So research has shown that kids who have predictable routines have a greater sense of trust in the world around them. They tend to want to explore the world more, which means they feel a greater sense of competence and independence. So having predictable routines is really important. It also helps children to be more regulated. The brain is relaxed because the brain knows what to expect. The brain is not in this hypervigilant state of having to be ready to shift and adjust in any moment because there's no predictability. This also can help in your home and family life in terms of cooperation and conflict. We respond better to things that we expect than when things are unexpected. So give that some thought. And creating routines also allows for a little bit of downtime and relaxation time, which are prime opportunities for connecting, for warmth, and for intimacy.
And in terms of that reducing conflict, if you have 5 minutes a day that everybody picks up the living room or that they pick up in their bedroom, that happens before dinner, that this happens before this every single day, it's a whole lot easier than suddenly on Saturday saying, okay, we all need to clean up, if that doesn't happen on a regular basis. And I would add that routines are just an order of activities. It doesn't mean they have to happen at a certain time. It could be that cleanup time happened an hour earlier yesterday because of our day, but it always comes before dinner. And it helps a lot when you plan routines with your family, when you sit down and say, when should we put in cleanup time? When should we put in screen time? And create these together, they're much more likely to follow them. Anything else about that, Tanika? Anything else about routine?
About routines? No, I think you said it all. I think, yeah. So the doing, I think it also helps when we're teaching children responsibilities, doing things little by little with regularity, rather than, like you said, it's Saturday, no one's leaving the house because we're going to clean up. It's much
Right.
easier to say every night before bed, we're going to put our toys away, or we're going to clean up this corner of the room. Right. Yeah. So
And, Tanika just gave an example of, we pick up our toys before bed. So what you want to look for, especially with younger kids, but with most of us, is doing the tough stuff before the easy stuff. So if they like the songs and reading, you're going to say, as soon as the toys are picked up, we're going to read your book. We're going to sing songs. So it's built-in discipline. When the toys are picked up, then we're going to do the fun thing. And they can make some choices. Another step, again, this is building that positive parent-child attachment. Another step is learning to accept your child as unique. And we call this being a gardener, not a carpenter. And there's actually a book by that title. What it means is creating an environment for your child to grow into who they are, staying open and curious about who they are versus trying to shape them. Kids are born with a certain temperament. You have a child who's more outgoing and one who's less outgoing. You have a child who likes new experiences. You have a child who's tentative about new experiences. These are inborn traits, and sometimes they're just like us, and we might like that, or it might drive us crazy. And sometimes they're the opposite of us, but there are genetic components to temperament. Kids have preferences, interests. They're forming their identity. They have opinions about the world. Your job is to stay open and curious about who they are versus working so hard to shape their worldview. This is especially important during adolescence, where they're exploring their identity and trying on different ways of seeing the world. But Gabor Mate, who just wrote an amazing book, Gabormate, is a trauma. He's a trauma guru for me. I'll watch him any time of the day. He just wrote a book called The Myth of Normal. And one of the things he says is that what children need to grow up healthy and mentally well is permission to be authentic in their family. And this is a huge challenge because your authentic child, for example, my daughter was really smart, did really well in school, but never really learned to love reading. And this was such a loss for me. This was like, how can you be a person in the world and not read? My husband and I, if you see books everywhere. Uh, but she reads as an adult sometimes, but she'd much rather be outdoors playing basketball, going for a walk, doing something physical. That's what brings her good mental health. You have to be ready to make some changes about what you think is good in the world and accept your child for who they are. I can't say this enough. And learn about who they are, be open to it. Let kids experiment, explore, and fail. Let kids do things they're not good at. They're not going to be successful in the world if you're guiding them to only do things that they're the best at. Let them try stuff. Be curious about their experience. My daughter was a fabulous gymnast and at 8 fell in love with basketball. She was this teeny little muscular coordinated kid and she was playing basketball. She played basketball on her wedding day and she loves basketball. She's never going to be in the WNBA, but letting kids do what they don't necessarily, aren't experts at really expands them, gives them courage and resilience. And you, as the observer and supporter, want to focus on their effort. You want to focus on progress they make. And you want to be curious about their learning process. I saw that you got 2 foul shots in that game. How'd you get that? How'd you get to the point where you can make those foul shots? You used to have so much trouble with it. All of these things are helpful. And invite your child to reflect. They tried out for the play, they didn't make it. What might they do next time? How might it work? And when they're successful, ask them how they did that. And spend time having fun and being playful. And do this every day, even with your teenagers. Just have times where you're enjoying them. Play cards, go for a walk, listen to them tell you about their new video game. Just listen, just try to understand it. Their new, social media experiences. Taking time out of the day where you just focus on the child one-on-one, you take them in, you take delight, no interruptions, no screens, relax and enjoy them, and infuse the day with lightheartedness, playfulness. It relaxes the brain, it strengthens relationships. And again, this refers back to what Tanika was talking about, self-regulation, noticing our stresses and being able to calm our brains. We encourage every Peace at Home parent to have one brain calming practice. It might be prayer. It might be visualizing a place you love. It might be visualizing a person who's calming to you. It might be breath. But one practice that you do for 5 minutes a day at least to get good at and to bring your emotional temperature down and to be so good at it that under stress, you can do your brain calming practice. This is self-regulation, which leads to that co-regulation. And focus on gratitude. Our brains are like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. What does that mean? It means that your brain, like every other human being on the planet, notices negative experiences better. You remember them. You focus on them and you get distracted by negative experiences better than positive ones. If I challenged you right now to write down 3 things that were a hassle today and 3 things you appreciated about today, you would do the first list first and you would find it much easier. And when you do daily practices of gratitude, being specific about, appreciating your kids. You can do practice of gratitude by telling your kids what you appreciate. I really appreciated that you helped your little brother get his shoes on. I see that you started your spelling homework on your own. And talk and having practices of gratitude in your family. So in our family, we used to hold hands before dinner and say one thing we appreciate about the day. We did this all the way through adolescence. And what I realized, what I learned later, which what positive psychology has taught us, is that when you have a daily gratitude practice, you create those pathways, those neural pathways that look for the positive. If every night at dinner you have to come up with something you liked about the day, your brain gets in that habit of looking for that positive experience. And you can keep a gratitude journal with your kids. You can write down 3 things they appreciated about the day. You can be generous towards your kids. And in addition to gratitude, talk about kindness. You might end the day by asking, what's one way you were kind to somebody today? And what's one way somebody was kind to you? This cues the brain to focus on kindness and do it regularly. All of these are practices to strengthen those positive attachments. Kids are going to attach to you no matter what, but the attachment might be attaching by arguing. It might be attaching by trying to get away. They need to attach to you, but whatever we reinforce is going to be how we attach. So these are the suggestions we're making today, and we want you to take a moment and tell us, how are you doing at these relationship strategies? Are you doing really great? You're practicing most of these 10, which would be, it's a lot. If you have young children, you might be doing a lot of this. If you have teenagers and you're still doing a lot of this, I say kudos to you. It might be good, maybe doing many of them, maybe it's okay and you need improvement, or maybe you're just not practicing them regularly enough, or it's a real challenge and you might need some help. Again, these are confidential responses. You can tell us the real story. And again, you can email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com to get some help with these, because these are all infused into a lot of our classes. So it looks like about half of us could use some improvement. We have one person who's doing great and doing most of these daily. If you would tell us the age of your child, I would love to hear that. Just put it in the chat. And we have about over a third of us are doing good, and a few of us are not practicing it regularly enough. So wherever you are, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I see
There's a question about receiving a certificate for this class.
if you need a certificate for this class, please email solutions and we'll see. And that person's child is 2. The person who's doing really great, there's 2. It's a lot easier when they're little.
But it can become a habit, which
exactly.
is great too.
Good. And it's very important because of that brain development for birth to 5, which is probably the most important brain development. So doing this in early childhood is super important. Any questions or comments? Okay.
So
this is you, Tanika.
So we have some final thoughts to sort of leave you with as we approach the end. So, I think we've all heard the adage, do as I say, not as I do. Your children are going to do as you do, whether you like it or not. So you're a role model. Again, as Ruth mentioned earlier, those mirror neurons. So children are constantly watching sort of what we are doing and sort of reflecting that back to us, and how we are with them is how they're going to be with us and probably with other people. So they take our behavior cues from us. They develop values and standards based on what our values and standards are. How do we treat people? Do we value kindness? How do we speak to people? How do we manage our anger, our feelings, right? So we really have to sort of, the children are watching us. They're watching us before they can ever tell us that they're watching us, and they continue to watch us as they get older and we don't even know it. So modeling is a really powerful teaching tool. There's lots of research and literature that suggests punishment is not an effective way to change or sort of establish behavior. Rewards, when I was an early clinician in my career, everybody was doing behavior modification and sticker charts. It was not effective. It did not work. all change is really mediated through relationships. And that's why the parenting relationship is so important. And so you really, you want to sort of live and be the example that you want to set for your child. And no pressure.
I think this is you,
Oh,
Tanika.
is this me too? Okay. So also to pay attention to stress. So we also have another great talk that we do about sort of the roots of stress and sort of brain biology. And so stress is necessary to sort of protect us and tell us when we're in trouble. It's an evolutionary process. But we need to be thinking about, when we feel threatened, those stress hormones get produced, and then we begin to experience what is called threat physiology. So we're either going to be what we call upregulated, where maybe we're really out of control and we can be explosive, or perhaps we become down-regulated and we completely, become frozen or paralyzed and can't respond at all. You probably have examples of this in your lives and family and friends that you've seen this. And so when we are stressed, there's something that happens. So this is a very neat little trick a neurologist once showed me. So let's pretend this is sort of your emotional hindbrain, in the back, primitive brain. And these people can hopefully people can see my fingers. And this is sort of what we call the prefrontal cortex, which helps us think, plan, make decisions, it's sort of the higher brain. So something happens, there's a stress, cortisol comes, and it's like, boom, you flip your top. So now you don't have access to this higher brain. You only have access to this primitive brain. So everything is going to be about what you're feeling and emotion. So it's like what the brain calming helps us to restore the functioning of our higher brain.
And Tanika's talking about that fight, flight, or freeze brain versus the thinking brain. You can take all the parenting classes in the world, but if you can't keep your brain in the thinking part of the brain, it won't be accessible to you. So, and none of us can stay in the thinking part of the brain all the time. When we perceive danger, we automatically go into that state. There's a question here about how can you support your kids if they develop unhealthy habits, addictions, etc., including addictions with substances or devices. So there's devices, especially gaming, are designed to make your child addicted, as are certain foods. And a lot of us are actually a lot of adults are modeling addictive behaviors with substances or food. And a lot of our advertising and marketing is about substances and food. Your child is surrounded by this. There's addiction physiology. If you're concerned, obviously go with your child to the doctor, go with your child to a clinician. Don't send them. If your child won't go, and we had a question about that, you go to see somebody who specializes in addictions. You go to talk to somebody and listen to your child. Don't nag them. Don't try to change the behavior right away. Just start by understanding. Help me understand how using marijuana right now helps you. What problem is it solving? Something like 80% of substance abusers have a dual diagnosis of a mental health problem and the addiction to the substance. And often the substance is a solution of kinds. Gabor Mate talks a lot about this, and you want to learn about it. But your relationship with the child is the biggest protective factor. Don't turn into a nag and a hassler and critical of your child when they need you the most. So stay connected and be interested and get support. So this is a little wrap up, or one of our wrap ups. Be this way with your child. The first question that Tanika referred to that I ask everybody, because the research is talking about this all over the place. Whatever parenting approach you're using, ask yourself, am I triggering stress or calm? Getting their homework done, getting off the phone, ending the video game. They're not called video games anymore, but ending the online game, getting their reading done. None of those things are as important as you working to keep your brain calm and helping your child be calm. It doesn't mean to become permissive, but it means to learn strategies to influence your child that are based on your relationship versus threat, lecture, yelling, punishing. Refrain from all criticism. There's actually research that depression in kids is associated with maternal criticism. I don't know why parental criticism isn't part of it, but I'm sure it's because kids might spend more time with their mothers in many cases. But parent criticism is a huge factor in kids' weak self-worth, seeing themselves negatively. Just stop criticizing. It isn't helpful. There's no such thing as constructive criticism when you're a parent. Refrain from labeling your child. Oh, he's never going to be able to manage his money. He hates math. He's no good at this. She's always distracting. Stop the labels, because they will live up to whatever labels you put on them. They're developing and growing and can change, and none of us respond well to labels. Refrain from giving unsolicited advice. Ask my daughter how hard this is for me. She's a parent now. But unsolicited advice is not going to strengthen your relationship, nor are your kids mostly going to follow it. Refrain from arguing with your kids. You don't need their approval. If you have a rule or there's some action that has to be taken, refrain from arguing. Just get on to the next step. Learn and apply positive discipline, the research-based discipline that is actually going to influence your kids and take care of your relationship at the same time. Be a gardener, not a carpenter. Focus on effort, progress, and process, and work on your own perfectionism. Perfectionism is striving for standards that we know cause us stress and striving for them anyway. And we have a whole class about that. So just email us at solutions and we'll tell you all about it. Any questions or comments? And I want to say that Tanika and I will stay on for a minute after we end the recording in case there's any last questions. But you can put them in the chat right now and we'll get to you. How do you approach getting a child off a screen when they do not listen? We've given you some of those solutions. One is to have routines where you know that certain things happen after certain things. You have agreed upon screen times that you've done with the child. And Tanika, do you have any, we have a whole class on managing screen time, so you can email us about that. Tanika, did you have any comments about
No,
that?
I was thinking along the lines of what you were saying as far as like, what are the rules, right? And that if there are specific times when screen time is allowed and happening, and then there needs to be some sort of transition where then there isn't screen time, that probably needs to be a part of that predictable routine that we talked about. And at this point, it might mean, in this case, making a rule change or introducing a new rule, probably.
Exactly. So I'm going to ask you to put into the chat what's going to be your first action step. There were lots of things we talked about, but something hopefully is bubbling up for you. Please just put it in the chat and we'll take a look at it. We'll be glad to see it. And you can share it just with us, or you can share it with the whole group. If you declare it publicly, it's much more likely that you're really going to do it.
Ruth, there's a Q&A about when do you recommend introducing cell phones into a child's life? I don't know if what the literature says about this, but
yeah, I don't have an answer, but what I would like you to do is, if you're in our private monitored Facebook group, and you're going to be invited to it when you get your follow-up email, please post that question, because I'd like to hear what folks have to say. We have a lot of professionals in that group. And if it shows up on the Facebook group, I will ask our screen teachers and our technology teachers what their thoughts are on that, because I don't know what the research is, and I don't even know if there is research, but it's a great question. I want to remind you that if you work for a company, your company can bring Peace at Home Parenting to you at no cost. The company can just pay for it as a benefit. You can also bring Peace at Home Parenting to your town or your school or a nonprofit where you work. So just email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com and we'll get you started to bring Peace at Home Parenting where you work and where your kids go to school. Every month we have a question and answer session, and this month's is happening on Thursday. We had some questions that came in for this class, and I'm going to hold them until Thursday's question and answer session. It's at 8 o'clock on Thursday. You can email us to get the link if you're a Peace at Home member. And I'll be talking with Marianne Barton, who is a psychologist at the University of Connecticut and in charge of training the psychologists at the University of Connecticut. And you can also access our all of our experts, including Tanika and me, for a private one-on-one consultation, or a consultation with you and your parenting partner, or even you and your parenting partner and your childcare providers. We're available to do that with you. At the end of this class, there's going to be a survey, and we're very grateful when you complete it. It really helps us understand what's working, what isn't, and what you need. So we'd be very grateful if you'll do that. Before we go, are there any big questions, Tanika, that we should be?
There was a question about the follow-up to what consequences should occur if a child is not responding to the rules about screen time.
So often consequences are best developed with your child. So you might sit down with them and say, you know, sometimes you have trouble getting off your screen. What do you think might help you be cooperative when that happens? Some things that I think of is I might say, you know, if you take extra time tomorrow, then that time will have to come off. If you take extra time today, that time will have to come off on tomorrow's time. So you might have a little less time. That's kind of a mild logical consequence, but it isn't really the consequences. It's really the routines, it's the agreements, and it's understanding what those screens mean to them. And please email us and we'll get you to the screen time classes. We have some recorded, we have some live ones. So we have some action steps, and some of you may be able to see them. Practicing gratitude and stating ways of kindness daily with each other. Finding positive strategies for discipline versus the strategies used now. Thank you. That's one of my favorite outcomes. Good to do before bed and calm the brain and end the day on a positive note. So if you've tried some strategies that don't work, email us and we'll see what we can come up for you. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and we really appreciate your sharing with the world, Peace at Home Parenting, letting them know about us, and bringing us to your workplace, to your schools, to your communities. And please reach out anytime. We're here to support you. Thanks, everybody. Complete your survey, and I'm going to end the recording, and then we'll see if there's any last questions.
Thank you, everyone.